What do you think about your creative push? Love it or hate it, let your opinion be heard by leaving a rating and review on iTunes. It only takes a couple minutes, and it's just about the nicest thing that you can do for podcasts that you love. Thank you, my pushers, for your valuable time in helping the show and spreading the word. Your Creative Push, episode 345.
If you are encountering an art block, try to find a concrete project that you want to sink your time into.
Welcome to Your Creative Push, the podcast that pushes you to pursue your creative passions. I'm your host, Youngmin Brown, and my guest today is Piper Thibodeau. Piper is a former full-time character designer for DreamWorks TV, and she is a freelance designer who also does daily paintings, and she's been doing those daily paintings for 7 years and counting. And she comes on the show today to talk about those 7 years, how she got started with her daily painting challenge, and how she's kept up with it for now 2,600 plus days in a row. She also discusses some of the initial setbacks that she encountered during that daily painting challenge, and her advice for anyone wanting to start a daily challenge of their own. Piper also recalls the experience of getting professional illustration work from Nick Jr. and DreamWorks Television while she was still in school, and some of the lessons that she learned early on that could help aspiring freelance illustrators. Piper also talks about how she attempts to not go stale by switching it up between illustrations, character designs, and pun drawings, and the value of having an offline reference library for yourself. And finally, she talks about some of her resistances, especially the resistance of schedule conflict and how she gets past it. If you yourself are thinking about doing a daily challenge, this is an episode that you can't miss because Piper is basically the queen of daily challenges, and it was a pleasure to speak with her and also pick her mind about that topic and many others. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with Piper Thibodeau. Piper, welcome to Your Creative Push.
Hello.
I have been just mesmerized by the fact that you have been doing what you've been doing, specifically a daily drawing every single day, which I want to get into later on for so long. But at the start of the podcast, I always like to give my guests the opportunity to kind of introduce yourself and tell us how you got to the point you are now, creatively speaking.
Cool. Awesome. So hi, I am a 27-year-old illustrator and visual development artist. I started drawing ever since I was a kid, basically, and I would draw a lot of monsters and Fakemon, like Pokemon type things. And eventually it kind of evolved into me going into 3D animation at school. I mean, at a college, and I wasn't really that satisfied with that direction because I found I wasn't drawing a lot. It was a lot of technical work, and I would prefer to draw physically, but what had happened at the time was I heard of another student doing a 365-day challenge to draw every day of the year. And I tried to do that myself to kind of get my feet wet again with drawing. And eventually it turned into about 7 years of that.
7 years.
Yeah. I just have a really hard time calling it quits, I'd say. As a result of me doing the dailies, I managed to get work while I was at school. Like it was kind of a way of I don't know if I could say networking, but it was kind of like a portfolio that was constantly being updated. And it allowed me to get work from Nickelodeon Junior and eventually DreamWorks Television, which I worked at for half a year, I'd say, as a character designer. And yeah, it led to a lot of cool opportunities. I illustrated some books, and I'm still keeping it up right now. Yeah, that's about where I am at right now.
Very cool. Yeah, so there's a lot of directions we can go with this, and I guess maybe we can go back to the beginning, at least of the challenge, because that's something we talk about on this podcast a lot. Is the idea of 10-day challenge, a 30-day challenge, a 100-day challenge, 365-day challenge, something where you're just getting to the work every single day and like how valuable that can be and how just the amount of work that you can put out, and also like the experience that you can get too. Like you can just like blast forward in your kind of artistic like skill set and of course your portfolio as well. So you basically started and it was a success right from the start?
No, absolutely not. It was a really rocky road in the beginning, actually. What had happened was that when I was attempting to do this every day, I wasn't giving myself a time limit. I would just essentially allow myself to work into the wee hours of the morning. And that kind of worked pretty poorly in conjunction with my insomnia, because I would wait until 4 o'clock in the morning to finish a piece. And eventually it led to me getting to about 3 days in of getting in a consistent dailies. And then by the 4th day, I'd start to do makeup dailies, because I would start to miss a day or two. And I kept just canceling the project and restarting back to zero every single time. And eventually I learned that the only way to get around that was to give myself a stringent deadline, where I told myself that if I don't get it in by midnight, so like I have a time constraint on this. There's absolutely no excuse unless it's something serious or medical or an emergency, which has happened a few times. But unless it's a serious emergency, if I don't make it by 12 o'clock, I have to restart the counter back to zero. And for some reason, that consequence really... Like right now that I'm at 2,000, I don't even remember. I've lost track.
You're over 2,600.
Oh, geez, yeah. Yeah, so I mean, I'm really absorbed with the consequence. Like I don't want to restart back to zero, so it's just a part of my life now. I have to draw something every day, and that has its consequences as well, I find. I could get into that later. I'm trying to work on fixing that currently, because I think that it's also a bit it could become restrictive if it's unguided, and if you start repeating yourself, and especially when you're busy like I've been with freelance work at the same time, it could become really easy to kind of lose steam with that. So you start repeating yourself, you start making drawings that look a little bit too similar. And what I've tried to do lately this year was to kind of step away from more of the pun types of drawings, and I tried to go more along the lines of I tried doing 1 day of character designs, 1 day of like a full-on colored illustration, and 1 day of pun drawing again. So I didn't completely step away from it, because I don't want to throw it out if it's working, essentially, because I think a lot of people have been enjoying the puns, I hope.
I do.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Really running out of those by this point. But so, that's where I am with that challenge. I could talk about the difficulties involved maybe at some point during the podcast if you'd like to go in that direction. But
let's go there now, because I think anybody that's tried it can definitely relate. Like people that do Inktober, or people that maybe pick a certain theme, like around Halloween, like in October, like wanting to do like maybe scary characters that they've created, or by day 20, maybe you start running out of ideas, or whatever the day may be for each particular person. But that's kind of where you have to dig in a little bit harder, I feel like.
Right. Yeah. I find what happens is, when you're starting from the beginning, especially when you don't have an audience necessarily at the very start, you have a lot of room to make mistakes with these. And I felt a lot more liberated at that point to kind of experiment in different areas that were more unconventional than I would try out right now. And so I was doing different styles. Some of it was creepier, which is really not like my work right now. A lot of it's cutesy because I've kind of refined it around what people like. Like I've become more affected by, I'm more influenced by what people are enjoying. I feel more inclined to put out work that people will enjoy rather than work that, doesn't really get much attention. And I don't like that dynamic very much. I think it's kind of holding me back. And I've been recently trying to step back and figure out how to find a happy medium where it still gets me work essentially, but I'm trying new things. And what I've been trying to do is I want to integrate, let's say like I haven't been drawing clouds in a while or something. So I'll try to find a daily idea that will incorporate trying something brand new while still kind of keeping it with the general theme that I've been having, because I consider what I'm doing to be a project instead of random drawings. So it has a sort of theme that when I start just putting random drawings, it's not really what people expect, so I can't mess with that too much. So yeah, I'm trying to just wheedle in some learning for myself and trying to keep that going at the same time. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense.
Okay, cool.
Because it's so easy to, like you said, when you got other stuff going on, to not necessarily phone it in, but just to go to like a tried and true classic that won't necessarily require that that kind of brain power, like that like puzzle type of brain power where like you have to like figure something out. And I think one of the best parts about creativity is when you can challenge yourself to learn something new. That is where like the juices really get flowing, and that's where like the kind of the excitement comes from. Yeah,
I completely agree. It's just you don't want your art becoming stale, and I think that's one of my major fears. Is this? I want it to be so. I want my dailies to be sort of like a warm up in the day before I go into my freelance work or my projects, and instead of something that's kind of a stumbling block, like, oh, I have to get this out of the way. It's really annoying, and that's I feel like I've had that for the most part. The past 3 years, it's starting to get a little bit more difficult because I have not had a concrete plan on how to approach them. Like one way, actually, as a suggestion to your viewers, I think one thing that I would recommend definitely is to plan your prompts in advance. Because I find that that's probably the hardest part. It's not so much drawing that gives me a hard time. It's coming up with an idea that's going to work that I find really difficult. Especially when I've run that well dry in terms of puns by this point. So if I could recommend anything, I think that if somebody were to do something like Inktober, I know that Inktober already has its prompts, but like you kind of already have more of a clearer idea. Like if I don't know, day 17 is a witch or something like that, like be a little bit more specific about what you're going to draw, so that when you get to the 17th day of the month, that you know what you're doing going in. Like you're not just scrambling around, like Googling for 2 hours. And because if you're going to draw on a daily basis or do something similar to something like my dailies, ideally you want to get it done with early in the day, or it's kind of contained. Like you know that you could handle it at the end of the day. It's not a stressor. You're not going to be Googling for an hour or two trying to figure out what to do. That's the worst case, I'd say.
Right. And that brings up a really interesting topic to me, is like finding references. What is your like process like? Have you done enough now where like your references are your own previous work, or do you find yourself on Google all the time, or Pinterest, or any other type of content related search query, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. I frequently go on Google Images for animal photographic references, to the point where I'm kind of trying to. I've been working on it. It's not really finessed by this point, but I have a library on my computer of references to use. So like I organize it by animal species and maybe like cars or environments, houses. Like I just kind of have a library so that I don't have to go into Google and kind of break my process. Because I find that when I start to Google around, it's very easy to get distracted. So I want to curb that as much as possible by at least just having the material on my computer, kind of like an on-site encyclopedia, at least in terms of images.
So yeah, that's one of the really interesting things about living in the internet age, is that anything is accessible to you, like as far as like knowledge or reference images or how to do something, just go on YouTube and you can figure it out. But that also opens up a can of worms because of the way that, especially places like YouTube or Facebook or Google, they want you to stay on the platform. So they give you another suggestion. Hey, how about this? You like this? Yeah. How about this? It can totally send you down the wormhole. So it's almost like you have to find a way to put yourself in airplane mode, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
So I love that idea of like creating like an offline reference library for yourself.
Right, and on the topic that you just brought up with certain sites being kind of formulated to keep you as distracted as possible, there's plenty of apps that are available that counter distraction. I've used that for YouTube as well because I'll sometimes use. I want to listen to something while I'm working, but I don't want to go down the endless rabbit hole of YouTube recommended sections and stuff. So I have an app that will completely cover up the recommended section and the homepage. So I could only kind of go to certain videos that I wanted to see. And I think probably there's something like that for other websites like Google. And I think it's important to look into that. Because, I mean, the people who own these sites are formulating it to get you using it as often as possible. So you kind of need to counter that in a way, I find. Especially social media, it's just really addictive. So
it's so interesting, too. Like, I was listening to something about how, I think it was a former Facebook exec or programmer, just the way that the notifications pop up, too. It's like you open up Facebook and you don't get that like little number near the notification bell for like a second or something like that. It's like the perfect amount of time to make you like anticipate how many notifications you have so that it totally hardwires your brain. It's so scary that they built that into it.
It's terrifying.
It's like you do have to battle against it.
Yeah, it's like you're being Pavlovianly trained to use your phone in that manner. And so, yeah, as an artist, I think we definitely are bombarded with a lot of visual stimuli in these ways. And you kind of just have to filter it for yourself for your own good, unless you happen to really have a great natural filter, in which case, good on you, because I don't know many people who do.
Right. Not many at all. So considering the fact that you had kind of a love-hate relationship with posting daily, like it didn't work, then it worked, then it didn't work, and now it's really working for you. Do you have any advice for anybody that maybe is thinking about doing a daily challenge? Maybe some advice for something that works for you?
Right. Well, depending on your comfort level, if you don't want to go straight into posting online, I think that you could be doing this on your own time and, just keeping it on maybe like a private blog spot until you feel comfortable enough to start posting it. Maybe, because if you perhaps can't get it every single day, because one of the things I found that was a little bit stressful to start off with is just, even if you know that people aren't really minding whether or not you skip a day or not, like when you make it public, it starts to feel a bit stressful. So if that's a problem, you could start to, just do these things on your own and get a kind of groove for it. And eventually when you feel comfortable to post it online, you could make that move and you could post all the backlogged images that you've created thus far. That's a possibility.
Yeah, it's not for everyone. And you're right. Once you enter the kind of public opinion, even if it may be only a few followers or, family and friends, it's like you are putting and making it into a sort of job that might not be necessary for everyone. So if you find it stresses you out, probably keep it just for yourself.
Right. Yeah, totally. And even on my end right now, if I'm doing something experimental, I won't post it until I'm comfortable and I feel like it's of a certain quality. If you feel like, because the reason why I would be reticent to post that kind of artwork is that, and in the back of my mind, I think like, oh, if I'm experimenting with something and then a potential employer or someone would want to hire me would see, I don't know, a crappy drawing that I'm just trying to test something out. I kind of don't want them to look at that. So another thing I could perhaps suggest is creating an anonymous profile somewhere. So like you could continue posting under some artist pseudonym, like an anonymous thing, and just so you could get critiques that way on your work, and no one's going to really trace it back to your main account. You kind of experiment a little. That's also possible if you're afraid that they're going to assume that your practice work is somehow reflective of your action, of the main body of your work.
Yeah, no. We are definitely proponents of anonymity on this podcast. Like Youngman Brown isn't my real name, and so many guests that I've had have had secret identities almost, and it's so key because it takes that pressure off of yourself and what your art might mean about you.
Right, totally. And what I'd say is just that I think it's very important to be okay with making mistakes and comfortable with exploring different venues with art. Part of why I'm recommending perhaps for some artists to be anonymous online is from, like I was mentioning, that like perhaps you don't want certain employers or potential clients to see weaker pieces of artwork. And especially if you have, I mean, I wouldn't consider myself to have a huge social media following, obviously, but when you have enough on there and you want to filter out the material properly, I could understand why you would want to kind of keep it low, like on the low down, I suppose.
So aside from maybe the challenges that arise from creating every day, coming up with ideas like you've talked about already, and not going stale, I was wondering, do you have any other resistances or things that rear their ugly head when you're sitting down to create? Maybe in the past, when you're first starting out, or maybe some that still do find their way into your brain?
Right. I'd say schedule conflict is probably a big one.
Schedule, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when I was working for DreamWorks full time, at the very end of the day, I would spend about an hour or two trying to figure out the daily, and it was pretty exhausting at the end of the day, I have to admit. I would do this at school as well. Like I'd sometimes be scrambling to pull something together while I was on the subway back home. I had a Cintiq companion, so I'd be drawing on my lap and everything, and yeah, I think that ideally you just want to have a peaceful slot in the day for you to work on this, that it just doesn't become a burden in any way. But unfortunately, when you start to encounter schedule changes like that, it's hard to really look that far in advance. So maybe one thing I could recommend is just you don't have to be so stringent like I've been with keeping track of every single day. Mm-hmm. If you have to take breaks, I don't see any reason why you can't take them. And you should readjust, kind of figure out how your schedule will work, and then resume. For
sure. Yeah. So many people that listen to this podcast have either non-creative jobs or, full-time jobs, kids, all kinds of life things that happen. And it is finding balance, and it's a tough balance to find sometimes, but I think you nailed it. Like if it starts to become stressful, if it starts to become overwhelming, and it's not necessarily part of your revenue stream, like you don't need to do it, don't let it turn into a job, don't let it turn into something stressful. That's something that I had to learn for myself recently. Like I needed a long break and it felt like I had definitely had that shame about it before, that's why I didn't take it. That's why it took me so long to take it until I couldn't take it on it anymore, But yeah, it's so important to take that break because without that incubation time and reset time, it gets crazy.
Right, totally. And you really ideally need to balance that with actually, if I could recommend anything, I think that if you have to choose between one of the two, I think you should probably choose to do studies instead of the daily type of work that I'm doing. Like it's really great to have both, because what you could do is with the studies. So if by studies, I mean like you're doing art studies of styles, or you're learning about fundamentals, like drawing fundamentals, painting fundamentals, color and light, all this kind of stuff. And then afterwards, when you've studied that, you apply it to something like a daily. Like, so they kind of complement each other. I think that's the most fulfilling way of going about it. You could kind of even time yourself. So maybe 30 minutes of studies and 30 minutes of application in a daily format. Yeah.
I was wondering, did you have any resources or like a favorite person, book, movie, YouTube clip, anything else that you draw inspiration from when you're lacking it?
I really enjoy Will Terry's channel. He's an illustrator.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think
Will's been on the show.
Oh, really? Oh, wow. That's awesome. Yeah, he's a great guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, he has fantastic resources for artists that are entering the illustration field. I would definitely recommend people to check his stuff out, because he has a really balanced approach to what he's saying, and I really like that.
Very cool. I've also heard you talk about before, like having like project ADD or even like book ADD. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Right. I'd say with me in particular, people, I mean, everyone's different, but I'm kind of like a light switch. Like I'm either all in on something or I'm a complete utter mess. And with projects, I'm either hyper organized and like I'm using applications like Trello and Microsoft To Do, and now I found a new program called what is this? Agonati, just to lay out all of the project steps in the most grueling detail, and I find that really helps me because I just like if I could break it down to the smallest step, I definitely have a better grasp on what to do going forward. When it's kind of up in the air, I just lose track of it, and I can't complete it.
Yeah, we'll definitely link some of those tools in the show notes page today as well.
Oh yeah, and Toggle's a great one too. I use Toggle actually to calculate the time taken on my freelance work, and but I also use it for to calculating time taken on a project, and it's a great tool.
So what do? You just like right before you start, it's just like a stopwatch, or?
So you could organize the time spent on each project that you input. So for instance, if I was doing freelance work, I would have typed out that as a separate project. And when I'm about to work on it, I select that project and I hit the timer and it will log how long I'm taking. And then I pause it, or if I'm taking a break, or when I'm finished, and it gives me a complete log of how much time I've spent on that project afterwards.
Very cool. Very useful as well.
Very,
okay, yeah. We'll definitely link that up. So when you were in school, you were not just taking classes. You were very active on Instagram, active on DeviantArt as well, and getting jobs, right?
Yeah, that was a difficult conflict. That was a difficult balancing act, I'd say.
I bet.
Yeah, like I was encountering situations where I was getting freelance work, and I'd have conflict with some teachers because they'd tell me that I have to do the classwork and not the freelance work. And that was really tough because I would try my best to kind of have my cake and eat it too, because I wanted to pass school, because I really needed to. I mean, I would have probably quit, honestly, but the reason why I wanted to finish it was because if I ever wanted to work in the States as a Canadian, I needed to finish school. I needed to get a diploma at the very least. So to boost my chances of getting a visa. So I wanted to finish that. So that's why I was forcing myself to just complete freelance work and schoolwork at the same time. And the schoolwork really suffered, I'd say. I just kind of was going bare minimum on that just to get the freelance work done.
Well, looking back, like aside from the reason that you wanted to finish, which is like completely valid reason in my opinion, would you have done it any different? Because I think the whole point of, going to art school is to not only to learn new skills, but to get work and to learn how to make it as an artist. And if you're already making money from your art, doing freelance work, and you're already kind of down that avenue and learning in that respect, do you think it was necessary then for art school as a whole?
Honestly, in retrospect, I think that I just, at the time, I didn't realize that I could actually make it as a freelance artist. I thought that I had to work in studio. So I felt pressured to finish school essentially to get the diploma so that I would have a higher chance of being hired in studio. So now if I had to do this all over again, I would absolutely not do it. It's just not for me, but there are people that work better in a school setting. And so I can't entirely just not recommend it. But for myself, I think that I work better on my own, just kind of self-teaching. Because for the most part, I mean, I'm an illustrator. So I was doing animation work at school. So I wasn't really able to feed that properly. I'm not trashing the school I went to, obviously. I think that for 3D animation, it's fantastic in that respect, but just wasn't really my cup of tea.
Right. And what's your opinion now on freelance versus studio work, especially for younger people that maybe, like you kind of mentioned, only saw themselves maybe working in a studio? what do you have to say about freelance work and making it as a freelance artist or illustrator?
I'd say, I can only speak in terms of the freelance work I've been doing since I haven't actually worked in studio in person. So I don't want to start trashing something that I have no experience in. But from a freelance perspective, I really enjoy it. I think that if you tolerate working alone fairly well, like if you could imagine yourself relatively isolated and just focusing on your work primarily, and you will miss out on the office environment essentially. And if you're okay with that, then go for it. And obviously you have to make sure that you will get a constant stream of, actually, if I have to mention anything, the downside of freelancing is that it's kind of unpredictable. You want to be sure that you're going to have enough work to make your needs. Yeah, that's one of the difficulties I find.
Yeah, it definitely requires that that kind of planning, sort of like you were talking about before with planning out your dailies, having sort of a calendar and a game plan.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's a little bit up in the air, but you have to be all right with that. And I think one of the best things is to kind of put your foot into different doors instead of only focusing on game design or maybe board games. Like you want to ideally kind of make different contacts in different fields. So if one field tends to dip for a period of time, like you have other options. Especially, I'd say children's books are really great. They're longer projects, but they have more pay up front, and that's good. That's helpful. And TV animation type jobs, they don't pay as much as a children's book right up front, but you have them in small bursts. So I kind of diversify that. I think it's good.
And isn't it pretty difficult in terms of children's book illustration?
I quite like it, but it's not as easy as it looks from the onset. I'd say, yeah, there's a lot of work involved in making a children's book, and you have to kind of go along with a schedule that matches up with your author and your editor. Yeah, I've actually finished making it wasn't a children's book; it was a how to draw book that I authored.
Drag and draw.
Yeah, drag and draw. I authored it and I wrote it, and that was a lot of work. That was quite hard to plan around, but now that I've finished the first book, I kind of have a better idea of how to approach the next. So you have that, at least, in regards to any new job that you have, I think it's always clunky on the first run because you won't know the ins and outs, but it's easier the second time coming in. So. Right.
And I think that definitely is something that holds a lot of people back, is that first doing that thing the first time. But it really is kind of like setting up the scaffolding or learning like a new language. Once you have that down, it makes all the future projects that much easier.
Right.
What's going to be the next book after drag and draw? What are we going to get to draw next?
Well, I'm actually I'm working on a couple of projects right now. I'll say that one of them is a children's book. I've been working on that recently, and the other one is a card game. And
ooh,
yay! I'm really excited
to work on that. What kind of card game?
I want to say more, but I'm just kind of waiting until I have work on. Yeah.
Okay. All right. We'll
sorry about that.
Patiently wait. No worries. So, can you talk about drag and draw a little bit more?
Sure.
What can people expect from that?
So basically, drag and draw is an introduction to digital drawing and some traditional drawing. It's primarily focused on, I'd say, ages 10 to 15, maybe 16. I talk about drawing fundamentals. It's less of a... I don't know if maybe some people get the wrong impression looking at the title of the book, but it's less about drawing dragons, in that kind of, in a lot of how to draw books, when you have the red lines, you have the original drawing, and then they kind of break it down.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't go with that approach. I went more into just talking about art fundamentals with dragons, and then eventually we talk about dragon anatomy. We talk about how to color them with color theory and all those fundamentals. And in the end, I go into more or less the finishing stuff like texturing. So yeah, it's. I hope that people will like it because it's my first time doing a tutorial book. I have not seen any reviews just yet, but I'm crossing my fingers that people will enjoy it.
Very cool. I'm sure they will. We'll link that up so that people can check it out and then give you a review.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. Piper, this has been awesome, but it is time for the final push. And that's where I ask you to reach through the microphone and grab the shoulder of one of the listeners that you've already really inspired today and just give them your best final words of advice and push them to pursue their own creative passions.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, by the way. Learning skills is easier when you apply it to an actual project, I find. And so if you're having trouble figuring out where to start in regards to self-teaching or if you just have hit an art block, I think one of the best cures is just really surrounding yourself with a project because it's kind of like you're putting a box around yourself to work within as opposed to just having a blank canvas in front of yourself. So you ideally want to give yourself some constraints, I find. So, I would definitely recommend that if you are encountering an art block, try to find a concrete project that you want to sink your time into. When you're focused on a project, it's going to kind of guide the way for you or where you need to, or the areas you need to touch up on.
Piper, thank you so much for coming on the show today, for sharing your story and sharing your inspiration. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And for everybody listening, you can find Piper on Twitter. She is Piper_Thibodeau. That's THIBODEAU. And you can also head to today's show notes page, yourcreativepush.com/345. Piper, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Massive thank you to Piper for coming on this show. There's a ton of ground that she covered in regards to daily challenges. So I actually want to talk about something else that she mentioned that's actually going to be brought up in a couple interviews coming up. Having your own reference library, having a folder or a notebook or some sort of database of not just reference material for you, whether you're a painter or a writer or a photographer, but also inspiration for yourself. Like Piper said, the internet's great for inspiration and for listening to things while you're creating, but the way that the internet works, we all know that it's going to suck you in as well. Perhaps your creative push sucks you into the Your Creative Push vortex of, 350 episodes. And please go into that vortex. But it is such a valuable resource and a valuable tool for you to build for yourself, to build that database, to build that reference library for yourself that's offline, that is just a few clicks away, that you can quickly get to not only have references, but to be inspired by something that inspired you in the past. Something in the past tickled your brain or pulled you in the direction of storing it away for later. So why not re-inspire yourself with those previous inspirations all in one place so that you don't have to spend your valuable time, energy, and also attention when you need those references and inspiration. So if you haven't already, something to think about, something to start building for yourself. And like I said, I promise we will talk about that in weeks to come. On our next episode, we have Adam Paquette. Adam has been an illustrator and concept artist since 2003, and he's been a freelancer since 2009. If you play Magic the Gathering, you have definitely seen his paintings, but he comes on the show next week to talk about his creative life, his creative career, and we dive deep into the psychology of what it means to be an artist. Definitely one that you don't want to miss. If you want to check out Adam's art and find out more about him, you can head to his website, adampaquettemtg.com, or on Instagram, he is Adam Paquette. That's Paquette. But we'll have that all linked up at today's show notes page, along with everything else we talked about with Piper at yourcreativepush.com/345. But that's all I've got for you today. So hopefully you were inspired to go and get your work done. If you're embarking upon a daily challenge, good luck to you. Godspeed. And don't forget to start building that reference library for yourself, that library of inspiration when you need it. Go and get some amazing work done. And remember that the universe needs your creations, and you are the universe. I love you all so much. We'll see you next time. Bye.